I remember as a young man perusing an old book in our local second-hand bookstore. It depicted the engravings of William Hogarth, an English painter, engraver, pictorial satirist, and social critic. His skill as an artist was his ability to make you feel part of his world. Take his London street scenes. You become part of them. You are swept along the alleyways, jostled by the city's denizens, forced to dodge the contents of an emptied bedchamber pot, or to carefully step over a drunken harlot. Hogarth's depictions of the darker side of London in the early 18th century reveal a different side to the Age of Enlightenment. This was a golden era for intellectual debate, artistic creativity, and for amassing spectacular fortunes. But it was also a time of appalling poverty and suffering for those less privileged. Hogarth had a rare insight into both worlds. He was one of the leading intellectuals of the time, a close friend of Handel, Garrick, and Henry Fielding, and well acquainted with Dr. Johnson. But he grew up in the grimy streets around Smithfield Meat Market and St. Bart's Hospital, the son of an educated but impoverished father. Like Dickens, he was gifted at observation of character and for the tiniest detail of depravity. Hogarth had a childhood blighted by the years his father spent in debtor's prison. He was also familiar with the dark bulk of Newgate Prison, now demolished, then just up the road from Smithfield. From this vermin-infested dungeon of despair, condemned prisoners would be carted along what is now Oxford Street, to the communal gallows at Tyburn. It was certainly a public show and very popular. Executions were thought to be a deterrent to crime. Ironically, pickpocketing at these events was rife due to the huge crowds, and so spectators were heartily welcomed in their thousands. The placement of the gallows in the centre of a busy roadway overlooking Hyde Park made it hard to miss. Those at the more fortuitous end of the social ladder could even pay to ascend viewing platforms, constructed especially for the occasion. You can get a sense of the ribald chaos of the crowds of Londoners attending these events in Hogarth's etching The Idle Apprentice. But how much of Hogarth's portrayal of London is caricature, and how much is a true reflection of the city of the time? Obviously Hogarth knew what would sell well. His engravings were also a social commentary. and he exposes the corruption, hypocrisy, poor taste, and moral decline that enveloped the teeming metropolis. A scene such as Gin Lane is his essay on the evils he attributed to the drink that had become a panacea for London's underclass. It has the air of a grotesque exaggeration. A drunken woman sprawls on the steps while her child falls into a cellar. Another feeds gin to her baby. A man fights with a dog for its bone. Another hangs himself in a garret. In the background a house collapses, while the only buildings that are in good repair are the pawnbrokers, the undertakers, and the distillery. Elsewhere, destitute gin drinkers are reduced to a brutal, feral existence. A carpenter and a housewife wearing ragged clothes desperately pawn their tools and pots and pans in order to fund their habit. The cadaverous ballad singer, slumped in the foreground, is in a woeful state of ill health. His black dog symbolizes despair. But, for all his love of exaggeration, the image depicted reality. Hogarth gathered inspiration from actual events at the time, as well as his direct impressions from the streets. One true account, dating from the 1730s, tells of Judith Dufour, who reclaimed her 2-year-old child from the workhouse and strangled the infant so that she could sell the clothes to buy gin. Another mother was accused of deliberately blinding a child as an aid to elicit more sympathy when begging. The amount of gin that was consumed was extraordinary. In 1751, the year that Hogarth produced the etching, more than 9,000 children died of alcohol poisoning. Every fourth house in St. Giles sold it, and more than 11 million gallons were consumed in a city with a population of much less than 1 million. The collapsing house seen in the background of Gin Lane was also a relatively common sight. Much of Hogarth's London was relatively new, rebuilt after the fire of 1666. The stonework of Wren's Cathedral and his city churches must have still gleamed. But many of the houses had been hastily reconstructed, and often very poorly so. Buildings collapsing in a swirling pile of dust and debris, in which the occupants and passers-by often died, were commonplace. In 1738, Dr. Johnson described London as a city where falling houses thunder on your head. Prostitution was another social ill. The Strand was one of many streets lined not just with fashionable coffee shops, but also brothels. Even Casanova was impressed. "It makes a magnificent debauch," he wrote in his Memoirs of London. And there is a note of enthusiasm in Boswell's description of the choices available to an interested gentleman, from the splendid madam at 50 guineas a night to the civil nymph who could be had for a pint of wine and a shilling. Many of these prostitutes were country girls who had been drawn into a city that was undergoing a boom of building and trade, but only a few prospered. Hogarth appears to have been acutely aware of this. He traced the fate of a young prostitute in A Harlot's Progress. Innocent Moll Hackett arrives from the country in the first plate, and steps straight off the coach into the arms of a brothel keeper. By plate 6, aged 23, she is dead, having suffered prison, syphilis, and abject poverty. It is not a simplistic narrative. At times, Moll appears complicit in the corruption, but she is clearly its principal victim. An area across the river from Westminster was known for its pleasure gardens, Vauxhall and Ranelagh Gardens enjoying the status of attracting the most colourful of the birds of paradise, who frequented the area in search of gentlemen. It was an expanse of trees, shrubs, footpaths, fountains and follies. Thousands from all walks of life, so long as they could afford the 1 shilling entrance fee, came each evening to gossip, stroll, buy food and drink, watch concerts and firework displays, and even ride in a hot air balloon. It displayed paintings by Hogarth in its supper booths, making it effectively the country's first public art gallery. Things got a little less respectable at night, when prostitutes, criminals and pickpockets emerged from their dens. Despite efforts to keep the riffraff of the city outside its elegant gates, Vauxhall had a slightly disreputable reputation. Its wooded groves and shady alleyways were the perfect place for a discreet assignation, and the well-dressed prostitute was very much associated with the garden, to the extent that London print shops sold images with titles like The Vauxhall Demi-Rep, showing tempting beauties in expensive but revealing clothing. One of the most scandalous events at Vauxhall occurred at a fancy dress masquerade in 1749, when the courtier Elizabeth Chudleigh arrived dressed as the classical figure Iphigenia, her costume consisting of nothing more than a thin scarf draped over her voluptuous body, accentuating the parts under the pretence of covering them. Again, the press and print sellers made a healthy profit. So how did the revellers at Vauxhall, with a bladder full of sherry or ale, relieve their distended organ? Public lavatories were not yet in existence. They were first introduced in 1851 in London's Crystal Palace. so most people simply found a quiet corner to spend a penny. Casanova even remarked at the frequency that he spied the hinder parts of persons relieving nature in the bushes. The wealthiest patrons who arrived by carriage and were accompanied by servants would have been able to retreat discreetly to their carriages and make use of an elegant chamber pot. But for most visitors to the pleasure gardens, it was a case of pee where there's a tree. Covent Garden, dubbed the Square of Venus, was one of the city's seediest corners. It was the very sink of vice, writes Dr. Matthew Green in his book, A Travel Guide Through Time. Blind fiddlers were in high demand, as they're perfect for orgies, unable to name and shame clients. In 1776, one man hired out a room at the Bedford Arms for an orgy with 4 prostitutes. When it was finished, instead of paying for the board and services rendered, he promptly shot himself in the head. There was even a special publication where sex workers could advertise their particular charms. Harris's List of Covent Garden Ladies, published from 1757 to 1795, described the physical appearance and sexual specialities of more than 120 women. Low-born errant drabs were included alongside famous courtesans. The entry for a certain Miss Davenport concludes, "Her teeth are remarkably fine. She is tall and so well proportioned, when you examine her whole naked figure, which she will permit you to do if you perform the Cytherean rites like an able priest," meaning pay for her services, that she might be taken for a 4th Grace, or a breathing animated Venus de Medici. When the German traveller Archenholz visited London in the late 18th century, he noticed that every evening around dusk, all the principal streets would fill with prostitutes dressed in gaudy colours. The better-class ladies of the night would walk about until they were addressed, but most of the streetwalkers actively accost the passengers and offer to accompany them. They would even surround them in crowds, stop and overwhelm them with caresses and entreaties. Around midnight, after the young women made their bargains and disappeared from the streets, then the old wretches of 50 or 60 years of age descend from their garrets and attack the intoxicated passengers, who are often prevailed upon to satisfy their passions in the open street. The better class of courtesans lived in the West End. Archenholz estimated that 30,000 ladies of pleasure resided in the single parish of Marylebone, of whom 1,700 were kept mistresses, paid an annuity by their seducers, living in elegant apartments and attended by servants. These live very well and without ever being disturbed by the magistrates. Archenholz wryly observed that if prostitution were suppressed, England's trade and economy would suffer. Without prostitutes, the shops supplying fashionable clothes and luxury products would fail. The theatres would close, for men went to the playhouse mainly to ogle and converse with prostitutes, and most of the entertainment industry would cease. London would soon be depopulated. The fine arts would be frightened away. One half of the inhabitants would be deprived of subsistence. Most prostitutes rounded up by the watchman were set free after a night in the watch-house, and given the usual cautionary warning. Arrests of prostitutes mostly took place on a Saturday night, the day their customers received and spent their week's wages. They were held over in the watch-house until the Monday morning, when they would be brought before a justice of the peace. A notorious incident occurred in July 1742, when 25 streetwalkers were crammed into St. Martin-in-the-Fields watch-house, and were left overnight without water, with the doors and windows locked shut. 4 were found dead the next morning, and 2 died shortly afterwards. An enraged crowd demolished the building. Elizabeth Scott of St. Giles-in-the-Fields told the court in September 1730 that the silver watch in her possession had not been stolen, but that her client had given it to her, to hold in pledge for half a crown that he was to give her for having carnal conversation with her, he refusing to give her the money first and telling her that he never used to give a woman anything beforehand, and that afterwards he would not give her the half-crown, and therefore she would not give him the watch. This seems fair enough, but she was found guilty of theft and transported. Hundreds of similar cases boiled down to the word of the clients versus the word of the prostitute, and juries regularly believed the client unless they were as disreputable as the prostitute. A humorous enactment of the day-to-day chaos of the city is the enraged musician. Here Hogarth, ever the patriot, is poking fun at an Italian violinist who cannot hear himself practice because of the din from the streets. Street musicians bawling babies, a knife grinder, the cries of itinerant salesmen, barking dogs, a drummer boy and a little girl with a rattle are the other musicians whose deafening noise make up the city orchestra. London in the 18th century was a city of coffee addicts. The capital's first coffee house was opened by an eccentric Greek named Pasquet Rosé in 1652, and at the peak of the boom, during the Georgian period, there were over 3,000. These were rowdy establishments where Londoners came to meet, greet, joke, debate and gossip. Upon entering, patrons would be engulfed in smoke, steam and sweat. Coffee houses were known as penny universities because customers, including students, artists, writers, merchants and businessmen, were charged a penny as an entrance fee, which covered the drink, newspapers, pamphlets and the latest news and gossip. Hoxton Square Coffee House was renowned for its inquisitions of insanity, where a suspected madman would be tied up and wheeled into the coffee room. A jury of coffee drinkers would view, prod and talk to the alleged lunatic, and then vote on whether to incarcerate the accused in one of the local madhouses. English coffee houses acted as public houses in which all were welcome, as long as they paid their penny for a cup of coffee. Every kind of creature in every walk of life frequented coffee houses. They included a town wit, a grave citizen, a worthy lawyer, a worthy justice, a reverend nonconformist, and a voluble sailor. Some historians even claimed that these institutions acted as democratic bodies due to their inclusive nature. Whether a man was dressed in a ragged coat and found himself seated between a belted earl and a gaitered bishop, it made no difference. Moreover, he was able to engage them in conversation, and know that he would be answered civilly. The Rake's Progress, a follow-up to The Harlot's Progress, follows the ill fortunes of Tom Rakewell. It moves from the time he inherits his late miserly father's fortune through the squandering of his money on prostitution and gambling, his imprisonment for debt in Fleet Prison, where Hogarth's own father suffered the same fate, and finally to his confinement in Bedlam due to his descent into lunacy. When the wig comes off, you know things have gone badly wrong in Hogarth's world. In a gambling den where he has lost his fortune, the spendthrift heir Tom Rakewell kneels and shakes his fist at heaven, taking no notice of the fact that his wig has fallen from his shaved head. In the next scene he wears a wig again, but as he goes mad in debtor's prison, his real hair is growing incongruously beneath it. Finally, in Bethlehem Hospital, Bedlam, he is a bald and nude figure. All around him in the dark cell are others driven mad, like him, by the distractions and temptations of London itself. In Marriage à la Mode, the 6 pictures tell of a brokered marriage between a rich merchant's daughter and the son of a bankrupt earl. The couple don't even look at each other as the deal is made, and in no time they're both sleeping around, with sensationally violent results. The final picture from William Hogarth's series Industry and Idleness shows Thomas Idle arriving for his execution at the gallows at Tyburn, accompanied by his coffin. In the foreground, a woman is selling fraudulent copies of The Last Dying Speech and Confession of Thomas Idle, which he has clearly not yet made, as often occurred at the time. Here the idle apprentice nears his execution. In the cart with him, as well as his coffin, is a Methodist preacher. In desperation he reads the Bible. Perhaps he has been converted at the last minute. In the background a pigeon is released to signal the approach of the prisoner. The hangman is relaxing on the gallows, smoking his pipe. Several carts are lined up to the right. The central wagon contains some prostitutes, enjoying the festivities and drinking. In this 11th plate, William Hogarth illustrates the consequences of the idle prentice's ruinous path, which has now come to an end. Hogarth produced Industry and Idleness as a series of 12 prints, sold for 1 shilling each in 1747. We are coming to the end of our tale, my dear friends. What about Hogarth? How did he fare in the constantly changing London? A new group of artists had emerged who wished to create an official art academy, along the lines of the Académie Française in Paris. Some of the younger artists, including Joshua Reynolds, were beginning to mock Hogarth, and in his old age he retreated from, and became isolated from, the London art world. Hogarth was a pugnacious man of independent mind and methods, eager to fight any members of the London art world with whom he disagreed. During his life he made a number of friends who remained loyal, but he also angered many others who were happy to see him fail. He died a bitter man at his home at Leicester Fields in October 1764, and was buried in the graveyard of St. Nicholas's Church at Chiswick.
Hello, my dears. Madam Ordsky here. Let's give the big ball a rub and see what comes out of it today. Oh, I can see some ectoplasm forming. I see some names emerging from the mist. Devoted patrons. Bonita Martin, Susanna Andrea, Shelley Valadez, Renee Poulin, Taffy Greaves, Rebecca Norton, Kelly Courtesans. These are the blessed devoted ones. I see many good fortunes on your travels, my dears. Thank you for visiting Madame Ordsky's tent. Thank you for crossing my palm with silver. Au revoir.
Well, my dear friends, I hope you enjoyed that presentation. I certainly enjoyed making it. I really like anything to do with the 18th century and 19th century. And there was lots of images for this video, quite a few of them courtesy of Mr. Hogarth himself. Thank you, Mr. Hogarth, wherever thee may be. My question is to you, would you like to have lived in the 18th century? Or would you like to travel back in time to take a glimpse at London in the 18th century? I've always thought about that. As you'll see later, I shall show you one of my cartoons I did in my early 20s to do with my fascination with the theory of time travel and travelling back to the 18th century. Obviously, you'd only have a good time if you were very rich and, of course, healthy. Without the health, and in those days you could drop dead very quickly. It would be so interesting. I think it'd be like some sort of weird dream, like a surreal carnival going back then. I think the country areas would be very quiet, but London would have been very strange with the extreme poverty and the misery of the people addicted to gin. That would have been terrible. But to see places like Mayfair and Marylebone and to go to the Vauxhall Gardens, I'd love that. Love to check it out. But as I say, you'd have to be rich. If you were poor back then, you were living in misery, basically. I think in the country, although they were poor in the country too, they still had a better lifestyle than those in London. Of course, back then was the big divide between the rich and the poor. The rich had really lots of money. Labour was so cheap they could build these huge places, while the poor lived in hovels. One thing I would not like is I like to have a hot shower every morning. So that wouldn't have been happening back then. In fact, I think everyone would have been a bit stinky. It didn't really go in for hygiene. Yes, people believed that water was definitely a no-go, in the winter at least, and probably sometimes in the summer. They didn't have the water filtration that we have nowadays. It was quite unsanitary. I do know, as you can see from this illustration here, that the Thames was filthy, so you wouldn't want to be bathing in that and getting any in your mouth. The first public baths in England didn't open until the 1820s. So there was no real chance of the poor people bathing anyway, unless they got water from the village pump and heated it up in winter. This belief was derived from sensible reasoning. Winter they didn't have central heating. A lot of places were really cold, so after they had a bath, they might catch cold or pneumonia, catch their death, as the old saying goes. So, bathing was not happening in winter very much. The rich and poor alike. And so basically all winter they would pretty much be ripe, and then when the summer came they'd go bathing in the streams. But then again, if everybody's stinking, then you're not really going to smell it. It's like if you eat garlic and your partner eats garlic too, then you don't smell it, but everyone else does. Anyway, I'm blathering on about this. I certainly get sidetracked. They had beer back then, and that is the next subject we will look at. So here we have Hogarth's Beer Street. And you can see that in comparison to Gin Lane, here the people are prosperous and they are enjoying life. Let's have a little closer look here. You can see that there's plentiful food here. The people are well dressed, healthy looking, and sculling back that big tankard there. And everyone is sort of fat and jolly. Now there's a lot of symbolism here. I'm not sure of it all. I know that they don't really know why this sign painter is dressed in rags. Perhaps it was Hogarth's own personal comment that artists or artisans were not being paid enough. Probably he was a bit disgruntled about that, although he did quite well, didn't he? The only business that's not doing well is the pawnbroker. The whole building is coming apart. The building is falling down. The evil pawnbroker who profits from other people's misery. And I did read that the reason why there was a little hole here where he's getting handed his tankard of beer was he's frightened to open the door in case the bailiffs or the debt collectors come to close him down. So he's making sure they can't get in. And everyone is, is doing well. And that's Beer Street. I always liked Gin Lane and Beer Street. I loved the comparison of the two. And Hogarth did indeed inspire me as a young man in my own cartoons. Some of them were very detailed, and some of them weren't that I did, but here's one that I did that's not so detailed, but you'll get the general idea of my love of time, of the thought of time travel. Let's have a look at it now. Here you can see one of my cartoons that was directly inspired from Hogarth's engravings. It hasn't yellowed, by the way. That was yellow paper. I had a big sort of drawing pad of all yellow paper. I like those sort of warm colours. I did a series of these. This was my mate Keith. He's still alive. He was a few years older than me at the time. He's still going though. And so this was our sort of drunken antics back in the 18th century. Just in case people have difficulty reading that, I'll read it out to you. So I'm saying to him, Keith, no, listen. Stop screaming for a minute. Listen, I've got some great news. I've found a way back to 1988. So I won't be around when they flay you and boil you. Anyway, mate, think of England. Hey, Keith, you haven't got a halfpenny, have you? This gin's not bad. And listen to this. A bloke in the tavern gave me this huge joint. I'm bloody ripped. Chin up. Pip, pip. That brings back memories. Not memories from the 18th century, just memories of when I did that cartoon. Yeah, so I did a series of these cartoons. You probably won't think it's hilarious. You might not get it. The very fact is that the theme we were discussing was the mischief you could get up to if you went back into hundreds of years ago and got drunk and stoned and tripping. It could be a lot of problems. You start telling them about the moon landing or about flying vehicles, helicopters and stuff, and you quickly end up on the top of a funeral pyre. And that's what they were all about, really. Just looking at them without knowing that, they might not seem that funny. Well, I think I'll sign off now. It's quite a long video, nearly up to about 40 minutes here, or a little over. One more video before the end of this year. I think I will post it on the Monday, on Boxing Day. Let everybody get Christmas out of the way, and usually on the Monday, and sitting there bloated from overeating and nothing else to do but wanting to watch the Blurb box, or instead watch one of my videos. Yeah, I think I'll post it on the Monday. Please let me know if you think that's a good idea instead of the Sunday. Well, Sunday's Christmas Day, and even if I posted it on the Saturday, you've all got a lot to do, I would imagine. I think Monday's the best bet. Anyway, my dear friends, take care. See you soon. I won't wish you Happy Christmas yet. It's too early. The next video. Alright, my dears. And I will post a personal Christmas message anyway. I'm definitely going now. Take care. God bless. Bye-bye.